Sarah Cole had spent 12 years trying to forget the dogfights, the combat missions, and the air-to-air engagements over hostile territory. Until terrorists hijacked her commercial flight with 147 passengers aboard, and she became the only pilot in American airspace who could fight back at 35,000 feet. Welcome to Daily Story. Before we dive into this extraordinary tale of aviation courage and hidden combat expertise, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button to join our community. Regional airlines form the backbone of American air travel, connecting smaller cities to major hubs through frequent short-haul flights that kept business flowing and families connected. These airlines operated with tight schedules, modest aircraft, and pilots who flew multiple segments daily, accumulating flight hours through repetition rather than drama. Lone Star Regional operated a fleet of Boeing 737-700s serving cities across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. The airline's pilots were known for professionalism, punctuality, and the kind of steady competence that made air travel feel routine rather than remarkable. Most passengers never learned their pilots' names, never wondered about their backgrounds, and trusted completely that they would arrive safely at their destinations. Captain Sarah Cole had flown for Lone Star Regional for 10 years, commanding Boeing 737s on routes that crisscrossed the American Southwest. At 44, she had logged over 12,000 flight hours in commercial aviation, earning a reputation as one of the airline's most reliable captains. She could land in crosswinds that kept other pilots circling, navigate through weather systems with precision that minimized delays, and handle mechanical issues with calm competence that reassured passengers and crew. Her colleagues knew her as the captain who never raised her voice, who could brief a flight plan in 30 seconds, and who somehow always seemed to know exactly what would happen next. She spoke with the clipped precision of someone accustomed to radio communications where every word mattered, used aviation terminology with military exactness, and flew with smoothness that made even severe turbulence feel manageable. Passengers occasionally noticed Captain Cole during boarding, a woman of medium height with short dark hair and a professional bearing that suggested complete confidence in her abilities. She would greet them with a brief smile, conduct her pre-flight checks with systematic efficiency, and deliver announcements in a calm voice that made flying feel as routine as riding a bus. Sarah lived in a small apartment near Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, where she could watch aircraft on approach from her balcony. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet woman who came and went at irregular hours, always in her pilot's uniform, always carrying the flight bag that was as much a part of her identity as her name. What Sarah's colleagues didn't know, what Lone Star Regional couldn't have suspected from her employment history, was that Major Sarah Cole, United States Air Force, had spent 16 years as one of America's most accomplished fighter pilots. She had flown F-16 Fighting Falcons during combat operations over Iraq and Afghanistan, engaging enemy aircraft, conducting precision strikes, and executing air superiority missions that had established American dominance in contested airspace. Her military aviation career included over 2,800 flight hours in fighter aircraft, 2 aerial combat victories, and classified missions that had taken her into airspace where American fighters weren't supposed to operate. Sarah had been among the first generation of female fighter pilots to see extensive combat, proving herself in an environment where any mistake could be fatal and where enemy pilots showed no consideration for gender when engaging in air-to-air combat. She had earned the call sign Viper for her aggressive flying style and the precision with which she prosecuted targets. The transition from fighter pilot to commercial airline captain had been part of a carefully planned career change. After 16 years of flying missions where split-second decisions determined whether you returned to base or were shot down, Sarah had chosen work that used her aviation skills to transport passengers rather than prosecute military objectives. Her apartment contained memorabilia from her Air Force career that she kept in a locked cabinet, photographs of aircraft she had flown, mission patches from operations she couldn't discuss openly, and her fighter pilot wings that represented 16 years of mastering one of the most demanding professions in military aviation. Her bookshelf held technical manuals on fighter tactics, air combat maneuvering, and tactical aviation that represented a lifetime of studying aerial warfare. Sarah had found satisfaction in work that used her flying skills without the constant stress of combat operations. Each day brought familiar challenges, weather navigation, passenger service, schedule adherence, but her passengers were families and business travelers rather than military personnel, and the threats she faced came from mechanical issues and weather rather than enemy fire. The morning of November 8 started with a routine schedule, 3 round trips between Dallas and Houston, the kind of shuttle service that defined regional airline operations. Sarah's first officer was Tom Rodriguez, a former Navy pilot with 8,000 hours of commercial experience who had flown with Sarah dozens of times. Flight 447's passenger manifest showed 147 people aboard, business travelers heading to Houston for meetings, families visiting relatives, and the usual collection of passengers who defined modern American air travel. Sarah completed her pre-flight checks with the systematic efficiency of someone who had performed the same procedures thousands of times. At 9:15 a.m., Flight 447 lifted off from Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport on what should have been a routine 50-minute flight to Houston. Sarah climbed to cruise altitude of 35,000 feet, engaged the autopilot, and was reviewing fuel calculations when her cockpit door alert activated. "Captain, we have a situation in the cabin," the senior flight attendant's voice came through the intercom with barely controlled panic. "Multiple passengers have weapons and are threatening crew and passengers." Sarah's blood went cold. 12 years of commercial aviation had prepared her for mechanical emergencies, medical crises, and weather challenges. But the possibility of hijacking existed in a different category, a threat that required responses civilian pilots weren't trained to execute.
Copy that.
How many individuals and what type of weapons? At least 3 that we can see, Captain. They have what look like knives, and one appears to have a device that might be explosive. Sarah immediately switched her radio to the emergency frequency. "Houston Center, this is Lone Star 447 declaring emergency. We have a hijacking in progress with multiple hostile individuals aboard. Request immediate military response and vector to nearest secure airport." The response from air traffic control came with a controlled urgency of professionals managing a nightmare scenario. "Lone Star 447, copy hijacking emergency. Military assets are being scrambled. Maintain current heading and altitude. Do not deviate from the assigned course." In the cabin behind her, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Through the cockpit door monitoring system, Sarah could see that the hijackers had moved to the front of the aircraft and were attempting to breach the reinforced cockpit door that had been installed on all commercial aircraft after September 11th. "Captain, they're trying to get into the cockpit," Rodriguez reported, his voice steady despite the situation. "That door won't hold forever if they have tools." Sarah made rapid calculations based on 16 years of tactical training. They were 180 miles from Houston, 120 miles from Dallas, and the hijackers were attempting to gain control of the aircraft. Standard protocol called for maintaining level flight and allowing military response to develop, but her tactical assessment told her that waiting meant allowing the hijackers time to achieve their objectives. Her radio activated with a new voice. "Lone Star 447, this is Houston Center. Be advised that 2 F-16s are being scrambled from Ellington Field. ETA to your position is 8 minutes. Maintain current course and altitude."
8 minutes.
Sarah knew from experience that 8 minutes was an eternity in tactical aviation. The hijackers would breach the cockpit long before fighter escort arrived, and once they controlled the aircraft, the situation would escalate from hijacking to a potential weapon of mass destruction. "Houston Center, Lone Star 447. The hijackers are attempting a cockpit breach. I'm going to need operational flexibility if they gain entry." "Lone Star 447, negative. You are directed to maintain level flight. Military response is en route." Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who had been monitoring the cabin situation while she coordinated with air traffic control. "Tom, those hijackers are going to breach this door in the next 3 minutes. When they do, they'll either kill us and fly this aircraft themselves, or they'll force us to fly it where they want." "What are you thinking, Captain?" Sarah made a decision based on 16 years of fighter pilot training and the absolute certainty that waiting meant allowing terrorists to turn her aircraft into a weapon. "I'm thinking that if they get through that door, I'm not going to make it easy for them to control this aircraft." The cockpit door shuddered under impacts that suggested the hijackers had tools or were using brute force to compromise the locks. Sarah disengaged the autopilot and placed her hands on the flight controls for the first time since reaching cruise altitude. "Tom, when that door breaches, I'm going to make this aircraft unflyable for anyone who doesn't have fighter pilot training. Get on the radio and tell Houston Center that we're going evasive." Rodriguez understood immediately what Sarah was proposing, using the Boeing 737's flight capabilities to create conditions that would prevent hijackers from controlling the aircraft. "Captain, commercial aircraft aren't designed for tactical maneuvering."
"I know.
But neither are hijackers." The cockpit door lock failed with a metallic crack. 3 men pushed through, brandishing weapons and shouting commands in a language Sarah didn't recognize. The lead hijacker pointed what appeared to be a knife at Sarah while screaming demands. What happened next would later be analyzed by aviation safety investigators, military tacticians, and counterterrorism experts as one of the most extraordinary examples of using commercial aircraft capabilities to defeat a hijacking attempt. Sarah threw the Boeing 737 into a series of maneuvers that commercial aircraft weren't designed to perform but that fighter pilots executed routinely during air combat training. She rolled the aircraft 60 degrees to the left while simultaneously pulling back on the controls, creating G-forces that threw the standing hijackers across the cockpit and pinned them against the bulkheads. Houston Center, Lone Star 447 has initiated evasive maneuvers. Hijackers are in the cockpit, but I'm preventing them from gaining control. Major Jack Morrison, leading the F-16 pair scrambled from Ellington Field, was monitoring the emergency frequency when he heard Sarah's transmission. He watched his radar display show the Boeing 737's flight path suddenly deviate from straight and level flight into maneuvers that commercial aircraft never performed.
Houston Center, Viper lead.
We're showing Lone Star 447 executing what appears to be tactical maneuvering. Can you confirm?
Viper lead, affirmative.
The captain reports she's using evasive action to prevent hijackers from controlling the aircraft. Morrison accelerated his F-16 to maximum speed, covering the remaining distance to the airliner's position in 3 minutes. When he pulled alongside the Boeing 737, what he saw made him immediately radio his wingman. Viper 2, you're not going to believe this. That 737 is flying air combat maneuvers. Inside the airliner, Sarah was executing a tactical defense that drew on 16 years of fighter pilot experience. She couldn't fight the hijackers physically, but she could make the aircraft's flight environment so chaotic that they couldn't stand, couldn't coordinate, and couldn't effectively threaten her or Rodriguez. She rolled the aircraft right, then left, maintaining just enough control to prevent structural damage while creating conditions that threw the hijackers around the cockpit like rag dolls. When one managed to grab a seat and stabilize himself enough to threaten Rodriguez, Sarah executed a negative G pushover that lifted him off the floor and slammed him into the ceiling. "Captain," Rodriguez shouted over the chaos, "we have military escort. 2 F-16s just pulled alongside." Sarah maintained her defensive maneuvering while checking her position. The F-16s were visible through her cockpit windows, matching her erratic flight path with the precision that only fighter pilots could maintain. Her radio activated with Morrison's voice. "Lone Star 447, this is Viper lead. We're alongside to assist. What's your situation?" Viper lead, Lone Star 447. "I have 3 hijackers in the cockpit, but I'm maintaining control through defensive maneuvering. I need you to coordinate a forced landing at the nearest military installation with emergency response ready." Lone Star 447, copy. "The nearest suitable field is Ellington. We'll escort you in. Can you maintain control?" Sarah executed another defensive roll that threw the lead hijacker across the cockpit. "Affirmative, Viper lead. I can maintain this as long as necessary." Morrison studied the airliner's maneuvering and suddenly understood what he was witnessing. "Lone Star 447, this is Viper lead. That's fighter pilot defensive flying. Where did you learn those maneuvers?" Viper lead, call sign was Viper 23 out of Shaw Air Force Base. F-16s, 2004 to 2020. I flew with the 20th Fighter Wing. Morrison's response came with recognition and respect. "Lone Star 447, Viper lead copies. Former Viper driver here too. Maintain your defensive pattern. We'll clear you for priority landing at Ellington. Ground response is being positioned." For the next 18 minutes, Sarah maintained defensive maneuvering that prevented the hijackers from coordinating any effective action while slowly descending toward Ellington Field. Her passengers endured a flight experience that varied between terrifying and nauseating, but Sarah's primary concern was preventing the hijackers from gaining control. Morrison and his wingman maintained close escort, ready to take more aggressive action if Sarah's defensive flying failed to maintain control. But as they watched the airliner execute maneuvers that pushed the limits of commercial aircraft design, both F-16 pilots recognized they were witnessing extraordinary airmanship.
Houston Center, Viper lead.
"That airline captain is executing tactical defensive flying that I've only seen in air combat training. She's maintaining perfect aircraft control while creating conditions that completely disable the hijacking attempt." Sarah lined up for landing at Ellington Field where FBI tactical teams, Air Force security forces, and emergency response units were positioned. She executed one final defensive maneuver that threw all 3 hijackers to the cockpit floor, then transitioned to a stable approach that brought the Boeing 737 to a perfect touchdown despite the chaos of the previous 20 minutes. The moment the aircraft stopped, tactical teams stormed aboard and secured the hijackers, who were disoriented, injured, and completely defeated by 20 minutes of flying that had prevented them from achieving any of their objectives. Sarah shut down the engines, completed her shutdown checklist with mechanical precision, and finally allowed herself to acknowledge the trembling in her hands that came from 20 minutes of maximum stress flying. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh boarded the aircraft and found Sarah sitting in the captain's seat, still wearing her headset, eyes focused on the instrument panel as if the flight were still continuing. "Captain Cole, I'm Special Agent Walsh, FBI. Are you injured?" Sarah finally looked up, her eyes showing the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had just experienced combat.
No. Passengers.
Medical teams are checking everyone now. Preliminary reports show some injuries from the turbulence and maneuvering, but no serious casualties. "Captain, I need to understand what happened up here. The military pilots are reporting that you executed tactical aviation maneuvers that commercial pilots aren't trained to perform." Sarah removed her headset and stood slowly, her legs unsteady after 20 minutes of maximum stress flying. "Agent Walsh, I'm a former Air Force fighter pilot. When those hijackers breached my cockpit, I used the only defensive capability I had, making this aircraft unflyable for anyone without fighter pilot training. Captain, you saved 147 lives today. But we're going to need a full debriefing on how a commercial airline pilot knows air combat maneuvering." 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a conference room at FBI headquarters in Houston with federal agents, FAA investigators, Air Force representatives, and airline executives. "Captain Cole," FAA Chief Investigator Robert Chun began, "your actions during the hijacking of Flight 447 prevented what intelligence agencies believe was a planned attack on Houston's petrochemical infrastructure. However, your defensive flying exceeded all parameters for commercial aircraft operations." Sarah had spent 3 days reviewing her decisions and remained convinced she had chosen the only viable course of action. Investigator Chun, "When terrorists breached my cockpit, standard protocols no longer applied. I made a tactical decision to use capabilities that prevented hijackers from controlling my aircraft." Major General Patricia Hayes, representing Air Force fighter operations, spoke next. "Captain Cole, I've reviewed your flight profile during the hijacking. You executed defensive maneuvers that are taught in fighter weapons school but aren't part of any commercial aviation training program. Your tactical flying prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack. General, I did what my training prepared me to do. 16 years of fighter pilot experience gave me capabilities that I hoped never to use in commercial aviation." FBI Special Agent Walsh presented intelligence findings. "Captain, the hijackers you defeated were part of a terrorist cell planning coordinated attacks on American infrastructure. Your defensive flying disrupted their operation and led to arrests of additional cell members. The investigation concluded that Sarah had acted appropriately given the extraordinary circumstances, though FAA regulations were amended to clarify that commercial pilots were authorized to use any necessary measures to prevent hijackers from controlling aircraft." 6 months later, Captain Sarah Cole was still flying for Lone Star Regional, but now her Boeing 737 was equipped with enhanced security systems and her expertise was being used to develop new training for commercial pilots on defensive flying techniques adapted from military aviation. She had established consultation with FBI counterterrorism units on aviation security, worked with Air Force fighter training programs to develop defensive flying protocols that commercial pilots could safely execute, and become an advocate for recognizing that commercial aviation security sometimes required capabilities that bridged civilian and military flying. The airline captain who passengers knew for routine flights was also the combat veteran who had demonstrated that commercial aircraft could be defended by pilots whose training exceeded the standard requirements for civilian aviation. Sarah had learned that leaving fighter aviation didn't mean abandoning combat expertise. It meant finding ways to use that knowledge to protect passengers while maintaining the commercial career she had chosen after 16 years of military service. Her actions revealed that some of the most valuable aviation capabilities resided in veterans who had chosen civilian careers while maintaining skills that could protect American airspace when threats emerged that required expertise existing in very few pilots. The woman who announced weather delays and served beverages was also the fighter pilot who could defend her aircraft and passengers using tactics that most people couldn't imagine, creating security through the combination of commercial professionalism and combat aviation mastery. So now I ask you, have you ever known a pilot, aviator, or transportation professional whose capabilities seemed to exceed what their job required? Someone who handled extreme situations with tactical precision that suggested much more demanding previous training? Share their story in the comments below. Tell us about the hidden aviation experts, the combat veterans who chose civilian service, the people who bring specialized skills to routine jobs while remaining ready to deploy extraordinary capabilities when emergencies reveal threats requiring expertise that defines the difference between tragedy and survival. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that protection sometimes comes from people working in the most routine roles while maintaining capabilities from careers that tested the absolute limits of human performance, hit that subscribe button and join the Daily Story community. We're here to honor the pilots, the combat aviators, The professionals who dedicate their lives to keeping others safe through skills that most passengers never see, serving communities through work that appears ordinary but contains depths of tactical expertise that become visible only when circumstances demand capabilities that separate trained professionals from true masters of their craft. Thank you for watching, and remember, the next time you board a commercial flight, look at your pilots and consider that they might possess capabilities far beyond the routine operations you observe. Some of them have flown missions you can't imagine, mastered skills few will ever learn, and chosen civilian service while maintaining readiness to protect their passengers using expertise that exists at the intersection of commercial aviation and military combat mastery.